Thanks, Chris. Well, first of all, I'd like to introduce myself. I'm Jeff Haberman. I'm the city forester here in Rochester. And you've already met Chris. He's with Planet Geo. They're the consulting company that's helping out with our urban forest master planning effort. And I'd also like to thank everyone here for taking time out of their day to join us. This whole urban forest master plan process began more than a year ago. We started by gathering data, which included doing a canopy assessment, and Chris will talk more about that. But that is the data that we used for the basis of the creation of our plan. Next, we began acquiring feedback from city staff and including other departments beyond park and recreation, including public works, community development, and Rochester Public Utilities. We also specifically reached out to stormwater folks with the city, members of Rochester area builders, and gathered feedback from residents alike. We've held 2 other meetings similar to this previously. Planet Geo then used this information and as well as reviewing internal documents, management plans, ordinances, and policies currently being used by all departments that may have an impact on our urban forest. This information was used in an auditing process that allowed us to measure how effectively we are sustainably managing our urban forest and identified shortcomings and where we can do better. So that's a short summary of how we got where we are here today. And without further ado, I'd like to introduce Chris Pfeiffer from Planet Geo.
All right, well, thanks, Jeff, and thanks to everyone for taking the time to listen to this live meeting or the recording. As a reminder, this is the second session. The first session was held at noon today. And so these recordings and a copy of the presentation will be available online as a resource so that you can refer back to the discussions and also share with folks who you might know that were unable to attend. So again, thank you for taking the time out of your day for joining us on this session to talk about the Urban Forest Master Plan. As Jeff mentioned, my name is Chris Pfeiffer, Director of Urban Forestry Consulting for Planet Geo, and I'm the project manager for the Rochester Urban Forest Master Plan project. Supporting the planning effort, we have GIS and natural resource specialist, Megan Blansett, who led the canopy analysis task and supporting studies that I'll share in this presentation. Andrew Carrier is an urban forestry consultant with Planet Geo, who was instrumental in conducting the initial research and the planning elements that I'll also describe. And we also have supporting staff that were part of the planning effort and also the reporting. And to set the stage for our presentation, I'm going to start off with a quote, but before I get into that, I just wanted to talk a little bit on meeting logistics. Again, it is recorded. Please use the chat box for any questions or comments that you have, and we'll be sure to circle back to those questions and comments later on in this meeting. We're also going to have some poll questions that are optional, and just to gauge the audience and to inform future outreach efforts. So stay tuned for those. But to start things off with this presentation, I'd like to now give a quote from a model of urban forest sustainability by James Clark and colleagues. And this quote reads, "Urban trees and forests are considered integral to the sustainability of cities as a whole. Yet sustainable urban forests are not born. They are made. They do not arise at random, but result from a community-wide commitment to their creation and management." So this quote is a great reminder that community engagement is vital to urban forestry planning. It describes the purpose of us gathering today and demonstrates the importance of a shared commitment to Rochester's urban forests that's guided by this master plan. For this presentation, we'll set the stage by describing the extent of the urban forest and what is covered in the Urban Forest Master Plan, which we'll also call the UFMP or the Master Plan in this presentation. We'll also describe the services and benefits provided by Rochester's trees, the key issues facing the urban forest, and opportunities identified during our planning efforts. Then we'll present the project findings that are based on 6 planning elements, and we'll go through and share some of those highlights. We'll also discuss the master plan's draft goals and actions that were developed based on these 6 planning elements. And we see this meeting and presentation as an opportunity for additional input and feedback on those draft goals and actions. So this is an opportunity to share other ideas, perhaps some elements that we didn't capture in those draft goals. And so utilize the chat box and the polls in this presentation today to share some of your insights on those matters. After that, we'll conclude with a recap and next steps, followed by an open discussion period. And we'll again circle back to the chat box, the poll responses, and then there's also, I believe, a raise hand feature. So you'll have the opportunity to not only type in your question or comment, but you may also speak up if you wish. So before we dive into the presentation, I thought it'd be good just to get folks warmed up with a poll to gather information about our audience a bit to help us in informing future outreach efforts. And so I'm going to just check the chat box here, and then I am going to launch the poll. And this is completely optional. I believe there will be 2 questions, but take a look at this map on the screen showing the location of the wards. If you're unsure exactly of your location, where you live, work, or visit in Rochester, just use your best guess, or there's an unsure option. So now I'm going to start the poll. And again, there are 2 questions. So taking a look at the map, feel free to enter those selections. And then also the other question is talking about what brought you here today, and just getting insights into the messaging that we can have going forward about the Urban Forest Master Plan. All right, we see some votes coming in. And then what I'll do is share these results and then get into just a little more open discussion before we get rolling. All right, well, it looks like we got everyone. So thanks for participating. I'm gonna end the poll here, download the results and share those. So we see a lot of the attendees coming from Ward 4. And then a question on what brought you here today. The majority answered, I care about our city's trees. And so that's great to hear some of the feedback about what brought you here today, and appreciate you sharing that. If you want to expand on any of that, feel free to use the chat box. We also like to just gauge and get a conversation going around trees in Rochester, starting off with your favorite tree, favorite park, or place that you like to recharge and visit and recreate, or any other comment or question urban forestry related. And so I'll stop the poll here and just give a reminder on the chat box, and then we'll get rolling here. So thanks for participating in that poll. Okay. So now I'd like to get into the presentation. And to present a plan for the urban forest, it's important to describe the extent. There are various landscapes that comprise the urban forest. We look citywide across all landscapes and ownership types, starting in the top left image. We also look at natural areas and open space. We look at riparian areas and the trees along waterways such as the Zumbro River, trees on academic and institutional lands, trees in parks like Allendale there in the center of the screen, and residential trees. We consider trees in industrial areas and as part of the Destination Medical Center projects, as well as trees in commercial or downtown areas. In any landscape, trees, like sidewalks and other infrastructure, are vital assets that require cohesive planning and management to sustain and enhance the associated benefits, as well as the city's levels of service provided to the community. While the master plan touches on all of these landscapes, It's focused primarily on the public tree population, those trees along boulevards, in parks, and open space. And so we'll get into a bit about the benefits of trees, and I just want to check the chat one more time here, and feel free to chime in or ask questions as we go along, and think back to your favorite tree or favorite park or area to visit in Rochester, and we'll talk about those in the open discussion. These trees across those landscapes that I described provide services and benefits to the community. The urban forest reduces stormwater and improves water quality. Trees provide shade over sidewalks and parking lots to reduce urban heat islands and conserve energy. And trees increase property values and improve human health and well-being, among many other environmental, economic, and social benefits. Not only are these benefits seen and felt, they can also be measured and quantified. The value of individual trees and the entire urban forest can be calculated in terms of increased property values, human health impacts of improving air quality, the savings acquired from reducing stormwater that would otherwise be managed by a facility, and the reduced energy use as a result of trees providing shade over residential and commercial properties. An example of this was applied to a subset of Rochester's tree population. An iTree study of 41,000 public trees was completed in 2018, and the ecosystem benefits were calculated using the U.S. Forest Service's iTree tools. So it was found that those 41,000 public trees provide nearly $1.3 million in benefits and services annually. So that's just a subset of what we estimate to be over 100,000 public trees that Parks and Forestry manage. And of those 41,000 public trees that were inventoried and assessed, $700,000 of those benefits are derived from stormwater management. So it's estimated that those 41,000 trees prevent nearly 27 million gallons of stormwater runoff per year. When you look at the volume of that, that's equivalent to over 40 Olympic-sized swimming pools. In addition, those 41,000 trees sequester the carbon dioxide emitted from nearly 400 vehicles per year, assuming an average mile per gallon and miles traveled. We also look at those 41,000 trees and their ability to save energy, which is equivalent to the usage of 329 family households with an average of 4,500 kilowatt hours per year per household. So imagine what the entire public tree population provides, those 100,000 plus trees, or even the entire urban forest across those landscapes I described. Fortunately, the city completed a high-resolution tree canopy assessment in 2020 that looks at tree canopy cover citywide. And through that assessment, we found that all trees in Rochester provide over $66 million in annual benefits. And that's derived from the services that I listed in regard to the 41,000 trees. So thinking about those volumes or those kilowatt hours saved, just growing greatly with the entire urban forest. While the benefits and services provided by the city's urban forests are well known, the master plan must also address challenges facing the future of Rochester's trees. So some of these challenges are presented on the screen. We see as population and cities grow and change, the locations and existing trees may be at risk. We must also continue to monitor the urban forest for existing and potential tree pests and diseases, such as emerald ash borer that's shown on the screen here. We also need to look at the composition of the urban forest, not just canopy cover, but what are the species? Invasive plant species compete with beneficial vegetation that provide, where the beneficial vegetation provide those ecosystem benefits. We also want to take a look at existing policies. Is there outdated language? Are there things to update based on the urban forest master plan? And what foundation of policies are needed in order to achieve the goals in a master plan? We also want to look at existing and potential resources in terms of staffing and funding, and also the responsibilities and workflows of the staff that interact with the trees of Rochester. Now that we set the stage by providing the extent of the urban forest and the benefits of trees, we'll discuss the key resources and opportunities as it relates to Rochester's urban forest. Much of the urban forestry program is coordinated by the Parks and Recreation's Parks and Forestry Division and is supported by other departments and partners. The Parks and Forestry Division, or division referenced in this presentation, is responsible for the management of park and boulevard trees, as I mentioned, totaling over 100,000 public trees on over 3,900 acres. There are a variety of programs managed or supported by the division. For example, the division is responsible for enforcing ordinances regarding emerald ash borer, Dutch elm disease, high-risk trees, and other concerns. They also provide permits and facilitate funding for planting and working on boulevard trees, as well as in other landscapes. The division also supports volunteer opportunities for planting trees, proper tree pruning training, and even spotting issues through programs such as the Citizen Forester, Citizen Pruners, and the Neighborhood Tree Watch programs. The Urban Forest Master Plan recognizes and supports existing planning efforts such as the Parks and Recreation System Plan, the Plan for Destination Medical Center, or DMC, and we also look at downtown plans such as the Downtown Rochester Master Plan. The Rochester Comprehensive Plan is also included in this analysis and considered when we develop the goals and actions for the master plan. This comprehensive plan is a long-range planning effort to address growth, change, and resiliency. So we want these plans to complement and support one another and not be competing or conflicting. We also want to consider leveraging existing resources where resources are scarce. And one other plan to mention is the Emerald Ash Borer, or EAB strategic plan. And there are, I think, over 40 different planning documents that we reviewed in this planning effort for the master plan, but those are just some highlights. So a strong foundation of policies is also required for a successful urban forestry program. The city currently has urban forestry related policies under sections 6 and 9 of the municipal code. These sections provide the guidelines for tree protection, maintenance, removals, and planting. In addition to municipal code, there are supporting manuals and standards. And some of these include the zoning ordinance and land development manual, the approved boulevard tree list, as well as planting specifications. So these programs, plans, and policies all provide the framework and foundation for implementing the Urban Forest Master Plan. As we transition to project findings in this presentation, this is just a reminder to use the chat box and to share your comments and questions. And then we'll be sure to circle back during the open discussion. So again, I see the chat box going. That's great. Thank you for your participation. And continue to think about questions you may have as it relates to the project findings, as well as those other questions of your favorite tree and what brought you here today. Now that we've defined the urban forest, discussed the key issues facing trees, and outlined existing resources, we'll discuss the initial project findings that inform the primary framework of the Urban Forest Master Plan. To begin this discussion, I present to you the draft vision for Rochester's urban forest on the left and the overall mission of the plan on the right of your screen. And this draft vision statement was derived from the previous community meeting, as well as the public surveys and the city project team input. And the vision reads, "Healthy trees, healthy city." Our city's trees, forests, and other natural resources are recognized as integral to sustaining life and health for all city residents. A healthy, thriving, and sustainable urban forest is a community priority to be thoughtfully managed and cared for by partnerships between the city and its residents to maximize public safety and benefits that include a thriving ecosystem, vibrant economy, and livable communities shared by all who live, work, and play in Rochester. And the mission statement describes the partners involved, the purpose, framework, objectives, and a call to action. With these vision and mission statements in mind, we're excited to present to you the findings and initial framework of the Urban Forest Master Plan. As a reminder from our last meeting, the Urban Forest Master Plan was developed by implementing these 6 planning elements that are listed on the left of your screen. We gathered and analyzed existing plans and resources, city staff and community input, existing data such as the canopy assessment and inventory, and Rochester's benchmarks compared to industry standards and similar cities to complete the U.S. Forest Service's urban forest audit system. The outcomes from these 6 planning elements were summarized in a research summary document that is now being finalized and going to be turned over to the city project team. And we use that information in the research summary to develop the Urban Forest Master Plan. So we're going to go through some highlights of those 6 planning elements, and you'll see how this all ties together to the audit system, which then helped us to develop the draft goals and actions. As Jeff mentioned, we completed a high-resolution tree canopy assessment. And so we start off with this discussion of the canopy assessment because it's important to have a baseline measurement to monitor progress as a program, as a plan, and as a community. To do this, many cities throughout the world are completing what is known as an urban tree canopy or tree canopy assessment. As we mentioned, Rochester completed this assessment in 2020 as part of this master plan project. This assessment is conducted using aerial imagery, LiDAR, and other data sets for that top-down look at land cover with a focus on trees. So when viewed from above, we look at the amount of land area covered by tree canopy and the possible planting space available. That's your grass and turf areas, as well as parking lots where that impervious surface can potentially be planted with an adjacent tree or removed and replaced with a tree for significant benefits, such as reduced urban heat islands and reduced stormwater volume flows. So we look at these across the city and by varying ownership types. Monitoring changes to these land cover types over time will inform plan implementation progress. It'll assess the impact of any policy changes. It'll help to identify priority planting areas. Potential causes for canopy loss can also be evaluated. And then the necessary adjustments to the master plan strategic actions can also be made by conducting these follow-up assessments of canopy. The first thing we look at is the big picture. How much tree cover is there across the city? Based on the analysis, we find that 28% of the city's land area is covered by the canopy of trees. So that's nearly 9,800 acres of canopy. And when you look at the numbers, that's equivalent to over 7,400 NFL-sized football fields. So when combining all trees throughout the city into one mass, one canopy, you would see that it would cover over 7,400 football fields. And this canopy cover includes both public and private trees, essentially all trees across every landscape that I described earlier. The assessment also looked at possible area for planting trees. And it was found that 38% of Rochester's land area is either grass or impervious area, which could theoretically be space for planting trees. You'll need to do additional analyses of ownership, land use type, purpose and function of a site to refine what is possible and to go from possible to feasible and preferable. But this is a good starting point to look at the opportunities to grow Rochester's urban forest. While 28% of the city is shaded by tree canopy, I think it's important to note that impervious surfaces, those parking lots or rooftops and driveways, they cover the same amount of the city as the urban forest, 28%. Impervious areas, again, are your primarily your parking lots and rooftops, and these contribute to stormwater runoff and increased surface temperatures, which we refer to as the urban heat island effect. So this is important in changing climates and looking at how trees can be mitigators or can help to adapt the site to be climate resilient. Another important component to the assessment is the evaluation of canopy change over time. And for this study, we used the data from the 2020 assessment, and then conducted a historical assessment using imagery from 1999. And it was found that between this 20-year period, tree canopy increased 8.1%. And we have a less than 2.0 standard error to make that estimate. So understanding how and where canopy has changed informs policies and practices that are described in the master plan. In addition to looking at the canopy and planting space citywide, we also summarize the data by planning boundaries. So you know the extent of the urban forest. You can also break it down into the highest or lowest tree canopied wards or census blocks, or even zoning type. You can also look at the most opportunity. Where's the most space to plant more trees? So this helps the city to establish finer scale canopy goals and planting targets. And it helps to more equitably distribute tree canopy and those associated benefits that I described. An important component to the UTC assessment is the analysis of the amount of tree canopy and planting space compared to environmental conditions, socio-demographic data, and human health. So we utilize data within the US Census Bureau's census block groups to identify correlations between tree canopy and these themes to inform tree preservation and planting guidance. So we may look at the amount of tree cover compared to the number of asthma cases reported, or to the lower median home value or lower income areas, and look at those correlations to see how a planting strategy could be developed. Now looking at the urban forest from a bottom-up approach, we examine the public trees managed by the Parks and Forestry Division and its partners. At the time of our analysis, the city has an inventory of public trees consisting of over 57,000 data points. Though, as we mentioned before, it's estimated that the division manages over 100,000 total public trees. So between the trees along boulevards and in parks and along the trail system, as well as an open space, the city has an incredible urban forest resource, and that resource must be planned and cared for to achieve its full potential in providing the maximum benefit for the residents in Rochester. So we looked at the top-down canopy assessment. Now we'll be looking at the ground-up, the inventory-based assessment. In 2020, the existing public tree inventory was used to assess tree abundance, distribution, composition, size classes, and functional benefit. And these key findings inform the master plan strategies and recommendations. And some of the highlights are presented on the screen here. One example is that the 57,000 public trees in the database are comprised of 86 unique tree species. So it's a rather diverse urban forest, though we find that Norway maples and green ash trees are 9% or greater in abundance. So that's a concern when you look at maintaining species diversity, as well as potential tree pests and diseases. It was also found that Kentucky coffee trees and swamp white oaks have the highest relative performance index, or RPI. So this is looking at the condition of trees in the urban forest and how well they're performing compared to the overall population. And those two species at the time seem to be doing the best in the public tree population. So the planting recommendations in the master plan address the importance of species diversity, climate change resiliency, and the right tree, right spot approach using this information. Other key figures uncovered from this effort describe the structure and condition of the public tree population. Over half of those 57,000 public trees are smaller than 8 inches in diameter, and almost 2/3 of them are in good condition. So these data summaries inform current and future maintenance needs that are guided by the master plan. Another key planning element is where we closely examine existing urban forest metrics or benchmarks, and then cross-examine them with industry standards and comparable communities. And this process, known as benchmarking research or urban forest benchmarks, utilized 2 data sets: the 2019 Arbor Day Foundation's Tree City USA reports from around 3,500 communities, as well as the 2014 Urban and Community Forestry Census completed by Richard Howard and Ward Peterson, which looks at urban forestry programs across the country, as well as in specific regions and as a population group. So then what we look at is the cross-examination of urban forestry program structure, budgets, and activities. And we completed this for Rochester and also looked at some of the cities that are listed in the top graph here on this slide. These cities were selected based on location, population size, program structure, and other attributes, which allow us to identify benchmarks for the future that are realistic and attainable. And these are guided by the Urban Forest Master Plan. So that table on your screen, we look at the Tree City USA records for Rochester on the left, and then the regional averages on the right. So keep in mind, other factors must be considered when looking at these comparisons. You need to look at the total public tree population, the program structure by community, as well as staff responsibilities. But these numbers offer us a starting point or a benchmark from which changes to the urban forest and the resources managing it can be measured over time. So we looked at the Arbor Day Tree City USA records, and now this slide provides a comparison based on that 2014 community forestry census. In this analysis, we find that while Rochester has a higher overall program budget compared to the population group of 100,000 to 250,000 people, the city has more public trees and park space than the average for the population group. So higher overall program budget compared to the population group, but also more public trees and park space compared to the population group. The chart provides a breakdown of the average budget per public tree, and this is a common metric used to compare urban forestry programs. Rochester's budget per public tree is much lower than the region's or population group. As the urban forest grows and changes, these metrics should be continually evaluated to identify any necessary resource changes to continue to provide that high level of service that Rochester strives for. So now getting into another planning element, community engagement or community interest and input, we gathered feedback and perceptions from the community to help inform the master plan's vision, goals, and actions. And we conducted this through a series of community meetings and 2 online public surveys. Looking at some of the highlights, over 3/4 of the responses in those surveys feel the city is doing a good job at managing public trees, though nearly 50% of responses noted a decline in tree health in the last 10 years. The majority of responses see the urban forest improving air quality as the most appreciated benefit. 80% support more tree canopy and a citywide canopy goal, but nearly 2/3 of the responses believe the city is understaffed to manage the public tree population and is not pruning enough public trees annually. So this gives us really great insights into what a master plan might entail as far as a roadmap to more sustainable urban forest management. And I think it really tells a story of the community wants more trees, but also wants them to be effectively managed. Between the 2 surveys, over 400 city residents responded, providing insights to the plan's observations, goals, and recommendations. Once the 5 planning elements were completed, the outcomes were applied to the U.S. Forest Service's Urban Forest Audit System. And this is a unique and systematic approach tailored to Rochester to evaluate the urban forest, the programs that manage it, and the community that shapes and benefits from it. In total, nearly 130 urban forestry elements were evaluated and ranked, providing a scoring system from which goals and actions can be developed and monitored over time. For this effort, we completed 4 rounds of the audit with extensive reviews from the city project team. And through this evaluation, we determined that the city of Rochester scored a 78% in terms of urban forest sustainability and management, as defined by the Forest Service, partners, and Planet Geo, the planning consultants. Most notably, from our past experience, where Rochester really shines is that 2/3 of the categories scored over 75%, and that's primarily due to the city's existing urban forestry program. That program is staffed with trained professionals to manage the urban forest and is guided by strong standards and policies. and practices largely. Though the city of Rochester scored high in these categories, there is room for improvement, most notably in the policy section. So I mentioned strong standards and practices. Where improvements could be made is in the policy and urban forest planning categories. The primary focus and framework of the master plan provides the strategic actions to address these shortcomings and maintain strengths. And this audit serves as a monitoring tool to measure progress going forward. In summary, to develop the master plan, 5 planning elements were completed and integrated into that urban forest audit system to inform the vision, goals, strategies, targets, and actions in the master plan. Through our planning efforts, we learned intricate details about the existing framework of policies, plans, staffing, and programs. We gathered baseline information from which goals can be set and measured, and integrated community viewpoints and perceptions to develop a plan with a vision that's shared by the city, its partners, and the community. So what do we do with all this information? From our findings, we begin to establish the goal and action framework, and through this process, we identified the need for establishing a citywide tree canopy goal with planting strategies to support the ambitious recommendation. The images on this slide are provided as an overview of what's included in the Urban Forest Master Plan. So starting on the far left, we see a map of Rochester census blocks. These are color-coded by the level of suitability for trees to address equity and underserved populations. Other priorities such as stormwater management, energy savings, vulnerable populations, and human health are also addressed in the master plan. The map in the center shows a composite of all those themes and the most suitable census block groups where trees can address these concerns. These are areas where planting the right trees may have the most beneficial impact. The top right map shows one example of what a priority census block may look like. In the cutout, we see over 6 acres of potential planting space on a site with less than the average existing canopy cover. A site like this may be considered the low-hanging fruit. It has the least amount of tree canopy and the most available space for planting trees. Again, additional analyses must be done to move potential planting sites into the feasible and preferable category, but it's a starting point from which the city can develop planting strategies. And the master plan provides this guidance. Lastly, the table in the bottom right provides a breakdown of potential tree canopy goals by zoning type. So we have industrial, downtown, commercial, and residential listed on the screen here. If we look specifically at the bottom row, the residential R1X zoning type, that residential zoning type has an existing canopy cover of 34%, and 41% of all R1X land area is possible planting area. It's not feasible or preferred to plant all available planting space, all 41%. Therefore, we set a hypothetical target to plant 15% of that 41% available space. And doing so would require 2,600 trees, resulting in a new canopy cover of 40% and nearly $30,000 in added benefits and services annually as those trees grow and mature. Planting these 2,600 trees should follow a strategic planting plan aligned with long-term citywide canopy goals and available resources. So that's just one example approach of and drilled down to the individual zoning type level, but this should be a comprehensive citywide effort. In this hypothetical scenario that I provided, the planting the recommended number of trees by zoning type for all zoning types would result in 83,000 trees across the city, providing nearly $1 million in added annual benefits and an increase of tree canopy citywide, going from 28% citywide tree canopy cover to 35% tree cover. Though the Urban Forest Master Plan provides guidance for establishing a canopy goal, a planting horizon such as 35% canopy by 2035, and the master plan provides planting priorities, the city must still review, modify, and officially adopt the canopy goal for Rochester. In any scenario, if the master plan is fully implemented, the city will have the resources, staff, and community support to effectively preserve and enhance the urban forest. So this is just a scenario that we look at on the small scale of individual zoning types. As you scale that up by planting the plantable space, we see what a citywide canopy goal may look like. Now that I've provided a summary of the outcomes from those 6 planning elements, we're ready to discuss how this information was integrated into the primary framework of the master plan. That includes the vision, goals, strategies, targets, and actions. So please take a moment to add your comments and questions about the project findings, and we'll be sure to circle back and also be ready for additional poll questions coming up towards the end of this next section. To achieve the vision for Rochester's urban forest, Healthy Trees, Healthy City, a series of goals derived from the urban forest audit system were established. If you recall, the audit has 11 categories, and these 6 goals presented on the slide here integrate elements of each of those categories to provide a roadmap for urban forest sustainability, program effectiveness, and community engagement. The goals begin with policy, looking at the strategies and actions necessary to maintain a solid foundation to ensure long-lasting impacts. The goals address the staffing levels and requirements to provide a high level of service. And these efforts are supported by budget and funding goals. To inform budget requests and necessary funding, a thorough understanding of the urban forest is necessary, guided by the goal for assessments and plans. And a plan is only successful when there is a shared commitment from the community to support policy and budget changes, and it is successful when a community is eager to participate and engage in the stewardship of the urban forest. So this is guided by the community engagement goals and actions. Lastly, under the green asset goal, the urban forest is planned and managed as a city asset that requires efficient and effective operations to maintain urban forest health and public safety. So from those 6 planning elements, we have these 6 primary urban forestry goals to achieve the vision of healthy trees, healthy city. To achieve these master plan goals, a series of strategic actions were developed that align with findings gathered from those planning elements. Tree management policy actions address collaboration, policy strengthening, and canopy goals. The capacity goal and the actions associated with that address communications, planning, training, and service levels. Budget and funding actions will secure a sustainable funding stream necessary to manage a growing and changing urban forest. The assessments and plans actions provide guidance on high-level and in-depth inventories and plans to support all actions in this master plan. The community engagement actions strengthen partnerships between the city, its partners, and the community as a whole. And the green asset management actions address tree maintenance, risk management, plantings, and sustainability. And this slide provides an overview of the action and target framework to support those goals and strategies. Here we see the tree management policy goal with 2 supporting actions listed. And each action includes an indicator of the priority and level of effort required. It also includes the lead implementer, collaborators, year to complete, as well as the co-benefits. And co-benefits are added value that comes with achieving that action and respective goal. For example, a neighborhood with dense tree canopy boulevards and landscape may have cooler summer temperatures that lead to fewer heat illnesses reported. So a co-benefit there is human health. Each action impacts 4 different co-benefits at various levels, and these include community, human health, equity, and natural environment. Now that I've provided an overview of the master plan's goals and strategic actions, I encourage those listening to think about how they might engage with the division and city partners to accomplish these goals. Think about the vision of the urban forest, healthy trees, healthy city. Think about the existing programs and the potential opportunities. And feel free to jot down your ideas or your questions in the chat box as it relates to supporting the plan's vision, goals, and actions. And to help the conversation, an example on the community level for the policies goal. You may consider attending city council meetings or participating in future tree-related surveys or sharing your thoughts on social media and other platforms. To support the capacity goals, you may consider volunteer events, planting and young tree care training, citizen pruner and forester programs, the use of service requests and city permits, as well as looking at opportunities for youth education and job training. And so I have other examples to provide to you on potential ways in which the community can help support the master plan, but feel free to jot down your ideas and we'll circle back on them. As you're writing down your answers or your thoughts, we're going to wrap up this section of the presentation with just a high-level overview of the implementation and monitoring process. So as part of the project, an interactive worksheet of goals, actions, and targets will be provided to enable the city's implementers to sort actions by order, priority, effort, and other action attributes. And this urban forest master plan will be updated and revised periodically to reflect changes in the urban forest structure and function, to incorporate changes in industry standards, to consider community response, and to measure progress of the urban forest partners in implementing the recommendations and reaching the established goals. This process should be implemented by the city project team or establishing an urban forest working group using the evaluate, monitor, report, and revise methodology. And some of the examples of those processes for monitoring are provided on the screen. So this slide indicates a transition from the project findings and the primary framework sections to the closing remarks and open discussion period. As a reminder, please use the chat box for any questions or comments. And I'm going to go on to the next slide with closing remarks, and stay tuned for an upcoming poll with 2 questions. So in this presentation, I shared the extent of the urban forest, looking across all landscapes, and the purpose of an urban forest master plan to maximize benefits, address key issues, and grow a healthy, sustainable urban forest. I talked about the existing programs and resources and how these serve as opportunities to implement the master plan. And I discussed the project findings that inform the goals, actions, and monitoring plan to achieve a shared vision. Lastly, we look at what has been completed and what lies ahead. As you recall, the project began in March of 2020, and shortly after, the tree canopy assessment was completed. We then conducted a deep dive by researching existing programs, policies, and plans, and launched the first public survey in October. A month later, we completed the city staff interviews, held a second public survey, and the first public meeting. Since that time, we've completed the research summary, the draft goal and action framework, and the draft urban forest master plan. And we would like to incorporate your feedback from this meeting to finalize the draft, and that draft will go to the city project team for review. After we incorporate their feedback, we anticipate completion of the master plan in June of this year. Now I'd like to turn it over to all of you for an open discussion. First, we'll open up with an optional poll with 2 questions, and then address the chat box questions and comments. And also, if you'd like to speak up, please use that raise hand feature and we'll call on you so that you can speak up during this meeting tonight. So now I'm going to start up the poll. All right, and it should be launched on your end. And we'll give that some time for folks to just provide some feedback and input on what they've got out of this session, and also what you'd like to see going forward. And as those votes or polls are coming in, I'm going to take a look at the chat box. Looks like lots of discussion here, so really thank all of you for participating and sharing your favorite tree, favorite park, looking at questions and comments. So as you're filling out that poll, we have a favorite tree being the bur oak, which is one of my favorites. We have the ginkgo as a favorite, and the Essex, Quarry Hill, and Cascade areas for recreation. Another bur oak favorite, and Quarry Hill being a favorite location. There's a sycamore off 4th Street that is listed here as one of the great features in Rochester's urban forest. And then we also look at the questions that we have here. So the poll is about to close, and I'll share those results, but it looks at some of the questions here. Can you estimate the number of open boulevard planting spaces? So yes, the canopy assessment allows us to determine the percent of land cover where planting can occur, and not necessarily planting spots, but that bottom-up approach inventory can serve as an inventory of potential planting spaces. And that's something that the city staff can look at going forward. All right, so I'm going to close the poll here and share the results. And like I said, this just helps us going forward with future meetings and community outreach efforts, and also follow-ups on questions and comments that you shared during this session here tonight. So thanks for participating. We see a majority interested in learning how the plan will address tree preservation and urban forest growth. And then folks, thank you for submitting your response. Appreciate the feedback, and glad to hear you enjoyed learning about the Urban Forest Master Plan. And I hope that this incites some encouragement to participate in implementing the master plan going forward, thinking about the community level efforts that you can do, the citizen pruner and forester programs, the neighborhood watch, the free tree giveaways, looking at planting trees appropriately and completing proper care post-planting on your property. So this is really great input and feedback that you all shared. Thank you. And so with that, I'm going to stop sharing and turn back to the chat box. And again, raise your hand if you'd like to speak up here. We have about 7 or 8 minutes, and do want to mention that we'll have our contact information at the end of this presentation, so you can do any follow-ups that we don't capture here at this meeting. All right, as I scroll through these, not to put you on the spot, Jeff, but I thought, are there any comments that you want to address directly, verbally, or should I just go through the list here?
You can go through the list. There was one question you might be better to answer than I. I think I got most of them answered, but somebody had asked if there were any examples of cities that implemented such lofty canopy cover goals, and were they able to implement them?
That's a good question. So oftentimes the canopy goals are set at a policy level without the guidance of how to actually achieve that canopy goal. What we wanted to do for Rochester is to start from the bottom up. What can be done on residential land, commercial, industrial land, and then scale that up to see what it might be feasible citywide. And that's where we get that 28% to 35% canopy goal as a recommendation for the city to consider. In other communities, we see ongoing efforts, whether it be through planting, master tree planting plans, urban forest management plans, and master plans, to strive towards achieving the canopy goal that they set. There aren't many that I see that have achieved that canopy goal level just yet. A lot of this effort began in 2008 to 2010, when the protocols for tree canopy assessments were established. So really, these communities that started early are only getting to their horizon now on the planting goals. But Washington, D.C. is an exception in that they've surpassed their canopy goal and are fully stocked with their public planting spots. So that's a client that we're fortunate to work with that utilize data heavily to strategically plan and plant their urban forests. That's the one that comes to mind first. And there are other communities, like I said, that have plans in place to achieve canopy goals, but DC is the first one that comes to mind. On a smaller scale, we see park level canopy goals being achieved, or looking at a sub-development canopy goal, but that's all I have for an answer at this time. That was a long-winded answer, but the important thing is that Rochester is setting a goal that is data driven, and I think that's going to really show well in pursuing a canopy goal. All right. Looking at some of the, I'm going to scroll down to the newer messages and then go back up. Let's see. Yep, so some announcements about the tree giveaway on
While
Arbor
you're
Day.
reading through that, Chris,
There might be a delay there. Go ahead, Jeff.
sorry. I just wanted to address Ruth Ann's question. She was unable to use the chat, but she was curious if we were still utilizing our gravel bed system, which is a system that you can hold bare root trees in for an entire growing season. It allows them to grow immense root systems. And to answer her question, yes, we still do use our gravel bed system every year. Currently, we keep about 500 trees, which is about what our budget will support us to purchase each year. Pretty much exclusively bare root trees that are stored in our gravel bed and planted year round. Great,
yeah, thanks for expanding on that. I saw a comment in the chat that is somewhat related. We have a gentleman here that mentioned that he's launching a nursery this year that includes on-site consultation to ensure proper matching of species to site conditions for every tree sold. And so they'll be offering 15 species and we'll be changing selections yearly to encourage biodiversity. And they're hoping to plant 300 trees a year. And we also have a Quercus macrocarpa fan here with the group. So great to see another fan of the bur oak. So that's a really interesting idea here presented in this meeting. Glad to hear that the nurseries are looking at right tree, right place approach for where the trees are going. And let's see. I mentioned the April 30th Arbor Day free tree giveaway at Silver Lake Park that Jeff announced, and we got more talk about the bur oak. Bur oaks are the trees this year for the giveaway, so that's great. All right, we're getting close to the end of the meeting, so I want to share the contact information, but continue to monitor the chat. And again, if you want to raise your hand and speak up, you're welcome to do so. Just going to go through the chat here. We'll also be saving this chat, so things that we missed during this discussion, we'll circle back to. So a good question here. How much larger would the city forestry department need to be to plant and care for that many new trees? So that is a case study that we're working on as part of the master plan, looking at optimal levels of staffing and the structure, as well as the budget, because we don't want to provide canopy goal recommendations without a plan on how to maintain those at a young stage and then as they get established in the urban forest. So the numbers aren't ready to be presented, but we will certainly be providing that in the master plan. Great question. And we have Jeff listed another comment here. One of our goals as a department is to set up contract growing opportunities to ensure we can get the trees we want to plant. Yes, that's an excellent point as well. One of the actions in the master plan is to look at working with the nurseries to expand the species palette for diversity goals and being resilient to tree pests and diseases and climate change. Great point there. All right, so we're at the closing of our presentation. Any questions or comments, please use the City Forester's email there at the bottom right of your screen. That's Jeff, who's joining us here this evening. And as a reminder, the presentation is being recorded and we'll be able to share that and a copy of this presentation. So keep a heads up on that resource and please share it with folks who you know would be interested in this discussion but maybe weren't able to attend either of the sessions today. And I'll at this time turn it over to Jeff for any last comments. And just before I do that, just want to say once again, thank you all for taking the time. Great discussion. The chat box was going nonstop. Really appreciate the participation here. So Jeff.
Yeah, thank you, Chris. I would just like to also extend my thank you to everybody that's here tonight and to let you know that your feedback is instrumental in helping us create a shared vision for how we want our urban forest to look for future generations of Rochester residents. And also a special thank you to Chris and the Planet Geo team, Andrew and others who've worked diligently through this entire process to provide an excellent document that we will use to manage our urban forest for the next 20 years. So thank you, everybody.
That's great. Yeah, great point there. Just the amount of input and feedback we receive from these outreach efforts is instrumental to the development of the plan. So once again, thank you all. There is a link for the last question to address here. How do we register for the Citizen Pruner class? Check out the chat box for that link. And with that, we're going to close this presentation and stay tuned for the recording and a copy of the presentation to refer back to and to share. So thank you, everyone, and have a great night. And we hope you can join us in implementing the Urban Forest Master Plan after June of this year. Take care, everyone.